Now, page 4, the private sector will save the private sector from the government-worsened Wuhan corona crisis. Various governments are closing businesses all around the country, right? They are demanding that restaurants only serve takeout food if they operate at all, bars totally shut down, and in some regions of the country, local municipalities are banning people from going out at all, even to work. In other words, government is grinding commerce to a halt. And if people can't go to work, then businesses can't operate. And if businesses don't make money, then how can workers make money? Thus, this government-mandated shutdown of businesses becomes a self-fulfilling, recession-triggering prophecy. It's not just that steakhouse down the street that's affected. There is a huge and damaging trickle-up effect. The wholesalers who supply that steakhouse suddenly have no clients. Their business is gone. Likewise, the linen company, along with all the other restaurant suppliers, bam, operations cease almost overnight. And the supply chains for those wholesalers, they too suddenly have no business. That meat packing house now has hundreds of sides of beef that will no longer be headed to dinner plates. And what about the suppliers, their suppliers? The slaughterhouses. No need to continue operations there when downstream there's no demand for a nice T-bone to be served on a clean, freshly ironed white tablecloth. And of course, those who supply the slaughterhouses, the cattle ranchers. In a blink of an eye, steady orders, steady business, gone. Instead of selling heads of beef, these ranchers are now in the business of just feeding them. And so this is the net market dislocation when government issues these edicts to shut down businesses. It's not just that steakhouse in that neighborhood, in that county, in that state. There is a huge and cascading ripple effect that causes pain and suffering well beyond locally. And so what does government do in response to its own damage to the private sector here in this case? Why, it passes federal legislation which mandates that those same businesses that were ordered shut down now pay for extended unemployment benefits. Oh yes, oh yes. That's what's included in the so-called stimulus law. More government mandates that crush businesses. Giving Americans a couple of grand is fine. It's fine. But it's not going to fix the radical market dislocation caused by the mandates and edicts decreed by federal, state, and local governments. Therefore, who will ultimately fix this economic mess? You, me, and our organic redistribution of wealth by spending our money at that local steakhouse. These government geniuses are making the Wuhan coronavirus crisis worse. Ultimately, only the private sector can fix the damage that's been inflicted by government on the private sector. Meantime, your government is going to throw trillions and trillions of our dollars at a so-called stimulus plan using borrowed money. And Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is sounding the fiscal alarm.
I rise in support of my amendment to pay for this economic stimulus package by removing less important spending from elsewhere in the budget.
Stop the tape. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? This is the pay-as-you-go that's supposed to be happening on Capitol Hill but never happens. They just go and worry about paying for it for future generations. And that's why I just checked the debt clock, $23.5 trillion. And when we come out of this corona spending spree, it's going to be over $25 trillion. That debt, the national debt, is going to be over $25 trillion before the end of the year, before the end of the fiscal year, maybe before the end of the calendar year. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be up there in the neighborhood of $25 trillion because of all this profligate spending. And so what is Rand Paul talking about here? Well, He's talking about what I do. He's talking about what you do. He's talking about what every American does when we have an unexpected expense. We budget. We prioritize. We say, hey, you know what? Because we had this roof leak and we had to put on a new roof, then we're not going to go and buy that new car just right away. That's the way it goes. We're going to spend the money on repairing the roof, and we're just going to have to deal with the old car for another 6, 9 months, 12 months, what have you. And then you can go out and buy the new car because you're budgeting. You're saying, hey, the roof is a priority. And okay, in this case, Corona's a priority. Fine, wonderful. You want to spend $1 trillion of taxpayer money on the coronavirus for all these crazy plans that they're trying to force on the American people and the American businesses. Fine, wonderful. But don't borrow the money. This is Rand Paul's point. Don't borrow the money. Don't run up the deficit. Don't run up the aggregate debt, because that's exactly what they're doing. And so we have here Rand Paul, the lone voice in the wilderness. He's the Gandhi on this issue. He's not wrong. He's right. The government needs to be responsible here, can react to a crisis and still be responsible at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. What happened in the 1930s cannot be repeated. What happened with FDR in the Great Depression, where he ballooned the size of government and took away, stole the liberty and the constitutional rights of millions of Americans in perpetuity. To this day, we're dealing with what FDR did. And we're unfortunately not learning from that calamity. He made a recession into a depression because of what he did. And the only thing that pulled America out of that was World War II. And then look at 2009, around that time when Barack Obama was giving us those shovel-ready jobs. Nearly $1 trillion of taxpayer money down the tubes. Did absolutely nothing, nothing at all. All it did was drive up the debt. Remember, when Barack Obama took office, the national debt was somewhere around $10 trillion. That's still a lot of money by the time he left office. Now, it's not all on Obama, by the way. Plenty of this is to be shared. And a lot of the blame goes to the Republican leadership at the time, going along with these crazy spending plans. But when Barack Obama left office, the national debt was somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 trillion. That's an astounding amount of money. In 8 years of a presidency, the national debt going up $10 trillion, effectively doubling. And so we're not considering that here. And this is why what Rand Paul is saying is so important, that we've got to pull in the fiscal craziness. We've got to pull in the reins of spending in Washington, D.C. We've got to bring some fiscal sanity back to the halls of Congress, or before we know it, it's not going to be the next generation that's going to be in trouble. It's going to be this one. And so Rand Paul is correct. Just because there is a crisis does not mean that lawmakers should spend like drunken socialists. Cut the waste, fraud, duplication, and abuse. That would help offset a lot of this spending. At least it's a start. Bottom line is, we are staring at another shovel-ready debacle that in the end will do very little in the recovery process of the U.S. economy.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.